John?
Yeah, good. This is your big moment.
Well, listen, Andrew, this is
Right. So we'll be here in a couple of days. What were you
Now, as you know, Ireland currently holds the presidency of the European Union Council, and the Taoiseach is leading the Council delegation. So he very much regrets not being here to join you. He very much wanted to be here to introduce this special occasion, and he has asked me, with your indulgence, to deliver his remarks on his behalf. So, again, I would like to warmly welcome you all to Iveagh House, and to this, the second in a series of commemorative lectures. In the first lecture in this series last year, we remembered events which once divided us, and in some respects still do, when Peter Robinson spoke of Edward Carson, his political legacy, and its relevance today. Tonight, we recall a more recent event that brought Ireland and the United States together in a rare and moving way: the visit to Ireland of President John F. Kennedy 50 years ago this month. And we also looked at a future relationship between Ireland and the US. Even today, the visit of an American president to these shores is an event of great moment. In 1963, the first visit of a sitting president, and a visit to the land of his great-grandparents, was simply enormous. It is hard to describe the level of excitement that it generated here at the time. Iveagh House has played host to many guests over the years, but none before or since have generated as much public enthusiasm as the young American president who crossed its threshold at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, 27th of June, 1963. What is striking about that evening was not the grandeur of the occasion, but the simplicity that shone through the grandeur. The government was determined to impose decorum on the evening, insisting on white tie and tails, but its efforts were doomed from the start. Over 2,000 onlookers crowded onto the south side of Stephen's Green, chanting, "We want Jack." No formality there. The president was late, it was said, and somebody here might be able to corroborate this, because his sisters had reached the bathroom first and used up all the hot water at the US residence in the Phoenix Park. As dinner was served, his curiosity was irrepressible as he stood continuously to speak to guests and waiting staff. It was a night when protocol clashed with human spontaneity and protocol lost. In 1963, President Kennedy's visit was proof to a young nation that the Irish could walk with honor on the world stage. Here was one of our own, in name, religion, at least that of the majority, and family, holder of the most powerful office on earth, acknowledging his ancestry by visiting not just the country of his forefathers, but the very homestead from which his great-grandfather had left Ireland. In terms of national psyche, this would be big news at any time, and it is worthy of recall half a century later. But let us not look only backwards. President Kennedy was a student of history who studied the past as a guide and inspiration for the future. Tonight, so should we. Tonight, let's be guided by curiosity about the man and the visit, what it meant to Ireland in the 60s, what the Irish-American relationship has meant since then, and what that relationship might mean in the future. Looking back at Ireland in 1963, we see quite simply another country. It was a country on the cusp of enormous economic and social change. It was a country that achieved political independence, but was afflicted by economic failure. Ireland in the early 1960s had settled as an independent, democratic, independent state, but it was still a highly traditional and somewhat authoritarian society. As President Kennedy said, Ireland is not rich and its progress is not complete. For the Irish at that time, America was modernity. And President Kennedy, the most modern of presidents, he came to honor his heritage, but for the Irish, he was about the future. He was part of the hope that one day we could and would create a modern Ireland. He brought youth, optimism, and idealism to politics. This was certainly not the politics as we knew it in Galway in 1963, and this is the Taoiseach speaking, remember, not me. Kennedy spoke like he believed in what he was saying. His belief was infectious. As we look back over 50 years, we should recall the enormous contribution that the Kennedy family have made to modernization and change in the United States, a contribution that has often inspired those working to create a modern Ireland. Those influences were already at play that week, though a few in Iveagh House could have seen their impact on this island. On Sunday, 23rd June, the day the President landed in Europe on the trip that took him to Ireland, Martin Luther King delivered the first version of his great I Have a Dream speech at the Cobo Stadium in Detroit. The hope that would change the face of America spread quickly to Ireland. It influenced many in this country whose aims converged around social reform and personal freedom. It influenced the women's movement, and in Northern Ireland, reformers took their name, their anthem, and their agenda from the civil rights movement in America. Later, as we worked to open up Irish society and to transform it from an inward-looking, authoritarian state to a modern, open European society with a global economic and foreign policy perspective, we have often looked to the liberal tradition that the Kennedy family championed. It is work that continues today, socially, economically, and in the realm of foreign policy. In 1963, the US Ireland Business Council was set up to help turn the Kennedy visit into trade and investment opportunities. It is still working and still encouraging Irish America to promote transatlantic trade links. Today, the Irish-US economic relationship is a vital part of our economy. We continue to work to develop our economic connections with the US, and this week the Irish presidency delivered on one of our key priorities, opening up talks on a US-EU transatlantic trade and investment partnership. When Jack Kennedy crossed the threshold to Iveagh House, Ireland already had a strong and distinct voice on the world stage. We spoke of values, and our most important platform was the UN, the United Nations. We didn't always agree with the United States then, as is sometimes the case today, but where we differed, we did so respectfully. 3 years previously, Ireland's ambassador to the UN, Freddie Boland, had chaired the General Assembly at perhaps its most celebrated session, banging his gavel to call Khrushchev to order as the Soviet president pounded his desk with his shoe in protest at Harold Macmillan. General Sean McEwen had been appointed commander of the peacekeeping force in the Congo. Conor Cruz O'Brien had been appointed to represent the Secretary General in Katanga. Our peacekeepers had paid a high price for their commitment when they were ambushed at Niemba. The General Assembly had unanimously adopted the so-called Irish Resolution, which would lead over time to nuclear non-proliferation treaty. The year before the visit, in 1962, The Economist proclaimed, "Ireland bestrides the UN like a colossus." But our best and brightest were not only in New York at the United Nations. Ireland's ambassador to Washington, T.J. Kiernan, through his patience and craft, played a critical role in making the President's visit happen. Ireland's foreign policy role was one that President Kennedy went out of his way to praise. As we near the end of another EU presidency and play an active role in the UN Human Rights Council, having been elected alongside the United States, we remain committed to projecting Irish values on a world stage, values of peace, human rights, and a commitment to confront hunger. Even as we have worked through our own economic difficulties, we've kept faith with the world's poorest by maintaining our development programme as a cornerstone of our foreign policy. In doing so, we have opened up a new chapter in the Irish-American relationships. That is the Taoiseach's meetings with Hillary Clinton, and more recently with John Kerry, have dealt less with Northern Ireland and more with human rights, poverty reduction, and childhood nutrition in the developing world. Of course, Northern Ireland remains a key shared concern, but as another American president speaking in Belfast this week said, hope is contagious. The peace that President Obama celebrated this week in Belfast could not have happened without a great many Irish Americans and countless transatlantic journeys. Tip O'Neill, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Bill Flynn, Hugh Carey, and of course, Ted Kennedy. I want to pay a particular welcome to the members of the Kennedy family who have travelled to be with us for this week's celebration. Jack Kennedy opened a relationship between a country and a family. In their dedication to that relationship, his brother Ted and sister Jean, who's with us tonight, helped us create a great legacy of peace. Others supported peace in quiet, profound ways, creating jobs, encouraging philanthropy, and planting hope in local communities. It is an honour to welcome back to Ireland one of the founders of the American Island Fund, Ambassador Dan Rooney and his wife Patricia. And it's an honour too to welcome the chair and guiding spirit of the American Island Fund, Loretta Brennan-Glucksman. It's often said that New York is the capital of Irish America. Well, Dan and Loretta are both from Pittsburgh. So if New York is the head of Irish America, and Boston, perhaps its soul, its heart must be in Pittsburgh. What then of the next 50 years? No issue has consumed as much attention and effort by Irish government and Irish American groups in recent years as immigration reform. As Congress again turns its attention to the issue, what does that future hold for our young people who want to travel or gain work experience in the US? They will shape the future. They will shape the relationship, as President Obama said this week, with their passion, their energy, and their ideas. Governor Martin O'Malley, who's with us this evening, is one of a new generation who are shaping politics in the US and will also shape this relationship. I'm honoured that he's agreed to join us this evening to share his thoughts on the future of this relationship. He has been Governor of Maryland since 2006, and before that he was Mayor of Baltimore in Maryland. I won't introduce him fully, but I do want to share just one well-kept secret with you, and I hope it is the case, that Governor O'Malley may well be the Governor of Maryland, but I understand that his American roots are cast from Pittsburgh steel. So, finally, I want to thank Ryan Tubridy for moderating this discussion and introducing Governor O'Malley. Ryan's book, JFK in Ireland, 4 Days That Changed a President, is a beautiful and thought-provoking account of that visit 50 years ago from this month. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Taoiseach's remarks. I know that I didn't sound much like Eamon Gilmore, and those of you who don't know me, particularly among our American visitors, have probably been asking themselves, who's the guy with the English accent up there? Well, like a number of you, I'm the son of an emigrant, and as it happens, my father was born and raised in Ballykelly, County Wexford, less than a mile from the Kennedy homestead in Dunganstown. And as a youth, he sometimes helped out at the Kennedy farm, digging turnips and cutting hay. And he emigrated from New Ross for the same reasons as Patrick Kennedy, exactly a century after him. So I hope you'll understand, therefore, that it's been an enormous honour for me, even though it arose by accident, to introduce the Iveagh House Kennedy Lecture. Thank you very much. And now, thank you very much. Now I'll hand over to our host this evening, Ryan Tubridy, author of the book and well known to everybody in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Hello. Well, I feel a bit left out because I'm not from Wexford, and I have no Wexford blood at all. I just need to, and I know half of you are saying, there's your man from the television, and the other half are saying, how did he get a job in television? In Ireland, not unlike America, anything is possible. Just a little bit of business before we kick off proceedings, and that is your phones. There's always a random phone. We call it mass. There's always somebody who gets caught because they left the phone on and the dinner in the oven and so on. So turn it off, please. Even airplane mode just isn't going to work for us because this conversation is being recorded for the radio. As you can see, Kevin Reynolds, our producer, is working the floor there because this conversation tonight will be broadcast on Saturday night on RTE Radio 1 at 7 p.m. So the nature of this evening, we don't want it to be too stuffy. We'd like you to be involved if you want to. If you'd like to make a contribution, by all means, please do. Kevin has the microphone there. You can let yourself be known as if you're bidding at a peculiar auction, and we'll come and get you. But that's for later on. I'm just going to make a few opening comments. David, thank you for your kind words. You've sat down there and replaced the Taoiseach with aplomb, all accents aside. Obviously, there are many people in the audience this evening with the name Patrick, and I'd like to talk briefly about the name Patrick. It was the name of my late father. It's my middle name, and it's a name that is very prominent in this beautiful country of ours. In the Kennedy family, I was always amazed by the fact that the name Patrick travelled only so far. The Kennedy who left New Ross in 1848 did so as Patrick Kennedy. And as you know, he went to Boston and he worked hard and eventually made a few quid and moved on. And as the Kennedys moved along through generations, they married up a little bit and they were burnt a little bit by society and they worked hard again and they grafted. But there came a point when the name Patrick wasn't as prevalent within the family as one might have thought. So by the time the president's father was born, Joseph Patrick Kennedy was not Paddy Joe or Patrick Joseph, he was Joseph Patrick. Some might say that the name Patrick was being moved slightly left of stage. So by the time the president and his family were born, including Ambassador Kennedy here this evening, Kennedy Smith, there are no Patricks in your esteemed family. In first names, there's Joseph, obviously, and there's Edward, and there's Bobby, and there's John, but no Patricks. Then we get to 1963, Ireland. John F. Kennedy comes to town. It's June. He delivers his Ich bin ein Berliner speech, gets on a plane, and lands in Dublin. It's a June Irish summer. It's grey, it's dark, and it's raining. Welcome to Ireland, Mr. President. He lands, he chats with Eamon de Valera and does the usual formalities. And as the trip proceeds, he's having a wonderful time. You can see it. People are saying at the time that maybe this is the end of the famine story for Ireland. Famine for many was the great hunger, but for others it was the great shame. And it was embarrassing, it was humiliating, and it was a horrible time for people because, as you know, figures come and go, but roughly speaking, it doesn't matter. If 1 million people leave a small island like this and another 1 million die on the streets and the fields of this country, that's not a good story at all. Some could say it was our own Holocaust. I don't think that's too strong a word to say. The destruction of nearly a whole people by a disaster like a potato famine. And as it happened, we saw that generations had trouble even talking about it over the dinner or over coffee or over tea or whatever it might have been, until John F. Kennedy got elected President of the United States of America, and there was a sense that maybe this might change things. Maybe the historical bend on the road could be turned. So by the time John F. Kennedy landed in Dublin Airport, the Irish ambassador to Washington at the time, Thomas Kernan, said that this was possibly the closing of the famine circle, that this was the end of it, that emerging from this plane was this man who everyone said had the most amazing blue eyes and head of hair and white teeth and brown skin. We'd never seen a brown person in our lives in Ireland because of the meteorological inclemency. However, we were shocked by what we saw, and what we saw was this man who not only had come from Wexford, not only 2 or 3 generations before had been forced to leave the land amid death, destruction, poverty and pain, but within 2, 3 generations maybe, had become the most powerful man on the planet Earth. Now that's a story, and it's an extraordinary story, because by the time the president left here, having had what I thought was a ball, looking at the archive certainly, of a trip, he went home. His wife wasn't with him because she was pregnant. She'd already had Caroline and John, as you know, and he went home in August. She had a baby. Sadly, the baby wasn't to survive, but they called the baby Patrick, and suddenly it was open season again. The Kennedys, I believe, on those 4 days, re-embraced with their Irishness, refound their Irishness to some extent, and I think they came home. And that's why it's so lovely to see Jean Kennedy Smith here tonight, Congressman Kennedy, and friends with us tonight, because you're home. It's nice to see even Governor O'Malley from Mam Cross, late of Mam Cross in beautiful Connemara. You're home. Most of the Americans here tonight who join us, Ambassador Rooney, you're home. And no matter how far you stray, when you get back here with roots like that, you always come home. And when the president died, he left behind him a family who embraced Ireland and embraced the Irish story. I call it the Kennedy dividend, and in many respects from that comes the peace dividend from the United States of America. That gives us Ted Kennedy. We talked earlier on with the congressman, his son. We talked about how Ted Kennedy just kept motoring along, kept pushing the peace process. Low grade, deeply effective. And then President Clinton, who of course is everybody's best friend, comes along, and with only the charm that he can and the ability and the smarts that he has, turns around and makes this extraordinary appointment, Jean Kennedy Smith. And people raised an eyebrow and said, another Kennedy in Ireland? What are we going to do with that? And what an inspired choice it was in the end. Gerry Adams is here tonight. Gerry Adams got a visa to the United States of America thanks to this lady here, that president over there, and the family. the family from Boston who left in 1848 because of all the wrong reasons. This is an amazing story. Last night I drove to Derry. All my life as a young man, all I heard on the news was death and destruction on that side of the border. Sad news. Every time we turn it off sometimes. It was just too sad. Taxi driver, Catholic, dead tonight. Catholic, Protestant, dead the next day. Try telling your children about that, especially Irish. They wouldn't believe it. That death and destruction just up the road. Last night, walking over the Peace Bridge in Derry, I found myself thinking, Kansas has become Oz. And it's thanks to a lot of the people in this room. And again, all roads lead back to 1848 and onwards to the Kennedy White House. That's the impact, that's the Kennedy dividend, and I'm glad to say that's the peace dividend. I'm going to leave you with one comment, which comes from the mouth of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who wrote a letter to Eamon de Valera on January the 22nd, 1964. A woman still in mourning, clearly, for her husband. But I think this letter, for me, certainly sums up an awful lot of what Ireland meant to President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. People have been quite cynical about the trip down through the years. But when you dig into the archive deep enough, and if you care enough, you'll realize that there's more to this story than simple nostalgic whimsy. The letter, just if I may briefly read it to you, goes something like this. Dear Mr. President, I do wish to thank you with all my heart for coming to my husband's funeral and for bringing with you the Irish cadets who had moved him so a few months before in Ireland and who then moved the world at his grave. I'm only grateful for one thing in these sad days, that he did have the chance to return to Ireland as President of the United States last summer. And that trip meant more to him than any other in his life. He called me every night and would tell me of what had passed in that day. He would never have been president had he not been Irish. All the history of your people is a long one of overcoming obstacles. And he felt that burden on him as a young Irishman in Boston. And he had so many obstacles in his path: his religion, his health, his youth, the fight against each from the time he was a boy, and by always striving, he ended as president. He was so conscious of his heritage and so proud of it, and Ireland can be proud that they gave the United States its greatest president. Now, these words may sound the words of a bereaved wife, but in a generation, that is what they'll be teaching to school children. And I'll bring up my children to be as proud of being Irish as he was. Already, our house is named Wexford, and they play with those beautiful animals, the Connemara pony and the deer. And whenever they see anything beautiful or good, they say, that must be Irish. And when they're old enough, I'll bring them over there. So I sent to you and to Mrs. de Valera 2 cards. One was how he looked during the campaign, the youngest one, and the other as president, how it aged him in less than 3 years. And I know we were all so blessed to have him as long as we did, but I will never understand why God had to take him now. I send you my deepest gratitude. Sincerely, Jacqueline Kennedy. Well, the memory lives on, and that's why we're here tonight. So to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, particularly our friends from the United States, welcome home. I'd like to introduce you to 2 esteemed panelists there who've been waiting with the patience of Job, if he had patience. Loretta Brennan-Glucksman, of course, is one of Ireland and America's greatest friends, chair of the American Ireland Funds. I took a brief look at your CV. It took me 2.5 hours. And I have to say, what you do for this country, I think, is greatly appreciated by anyone who knows you. And I don't need to go into that other than to say, welcome, Loretta, welcome back. And again, welcome home. Professor Joe Lee is currently taking up residence in New York University. I think you're missed by your people at home.
Glucksman Ireland House, and guess who the Glucksman is?
I'd never guess. I wasn't going to mention that, but nevertheless, as you're here, you're both very, very welcome. So I'm going to throw you a few questions, if that's okay, or even ask them politely, which is a better option. And ultimately, you all have free form to come in if you wish. If you want to make a comment or an observation, you're most welcome to. That's the way we'd like to do it. Just raise your hand or give us a nod. Pretend you're at Sotheby's for 10 minutes. Loretta, 1963, it's June. I mean, do you have any memories, or do you go back that far?
Well, I'm being a lady of a certain age. I just celebrated my 75th birthday, and so Governor O'Malley is the same age as my youngest child, which I found very impressive. I say that to put it in perspective. We were married with 3 babies under 4. We both were in graduate school. We both had a teaching schedule, and we both worked our heads off for John Kennedy in the campaign before, because we were Irish, Catholic Americans. it was like God smiled upon us and said, if you work really hard, this could happen. It changed the milieu of my part of America, which was Pennsylvania at that time. And I come from a long line of coal miners who were de facto Democrats, very passionate Democrats. So it just changed the scene. It changed the impetus. It changed, quite honestly, everything. And then when we won, it was just nothing could be stopped. Nothing good could be stopped. And that's why the impact of November, if anything, is still so traumatic after all those years to certainly people of my generation. But as the Kennedy administration went forward and the trip occurred and the possibility of bringing Irish America, really have an Irish part, my grandparents came here came to Pennsylvania never expecting to go home. You didn't hop on an airplane in those days. So it just opened everything. It was a magnificent experience to have. I wouldn't trade it for anything because of all the layers of it. And the trip just signified the possibilities that were ahead.
When the president was running for office, the main concern for people at large was not that he was Irish, but that he was Catholic.
Catholic, yeah.
And as you know, he went to Houston and delivered a speech to, I think it was Protestant ministers, and said, now you must understand this, I'm all about being an American president, not a Catholic president. I mean, our Taoiseach did something similar recently. Yes. It was almost a paraphrase, in fact. What were you as proud of him? Was it the Irishness or the Catholicism? Was it the backstory? What was it, or was it just his youth, his vigor? What part?
Well, I was taught by the Jesuits, so I wasn't proud of the Catholicism thing because we keep ourselves aside. But I wasn't so much in tune with the Catholicism, although it was hugely exciting. I gravitated to the Irish connection because my family was very, very Irish. We were not allowed to speak the language because my grandparents were very much into assimilation, as most people were in those times. But the stories, I knew all my prayers, a lot of poetry in Irish. So the fact that there might be a United States president with such Irish background, that was so exhilarating.
Joe, do you recall the presidential visit? I mean, looking at the archive and certainly reading the papers of the time, this was, as they say, wall-to-wall coverage. You couldn't escape it. What sort of opinion were you forming at that point?
Well, I mean, I shared the general excitement, you know, and adulation, and just uncritical joy at the whole thing. Partly because he himself projected so much joy. He was so obviously enjoying it from the very beginning. And you always begin, well, I shouldn't say you always begin, but you may begin with politicians by wondering, are they acting? I know that wouldn't apply to anybody here, but I mean, you know. He patently wasn't acting. This was genuine. It was coming through. Now, he wasn't a higher member because he'd done the Ich bin ein Berliner speech the previous day, I think, which had been greeted, you know, ecstatically in the Western world.
Yes.
And that had helped him recover from a number of buffetings in the States, because the first 2 years of his presidency had been rough. But then things began to work for him. And the Cuban crisis had established him. He came as a confidant, I think, to relax. And in the course of relaxing, I think he fell in love with Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I don't think, he was going to go through a ritual, I think, was the attitude. Maybe I'm wrong, as he was coming. And then he just, and I think he fell in love with Ireland because he sensed the love coming up to him from the streets, from the crowds as he travelled through.
You can see that if you watch the archive. You can see the president arriving down, and initially at the airport, it's all very nice to meet you and how's it going and everything. And then about 2 days in, he's roaring laughing. He's having gags with the aides around him. He's got a sister there. He's got a sister-in-law. He's got a whole gang of pals, the Murphia, as I think Jackie called them, surrounding him. He was having a ball. I mean, Loretta, as you're looking back at that trip, there's something very, I don't know if it's rose-tinted, but it certainly seems to have been the genuine article.
This is just such a sidebar. Every time I listen to Joe, I think of something, but it took the president coming to Ireland to have his German corrected. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's not,
It's a Ich bin ein Berliner, yeah.
Yeah, but he used a superfluous word, and some Irish person pointed that out to him.
Well, it would take an Irish person to do that, yeah.
That's so Irish.
Yeah. Does somebody want to come in there? Sorry, Kev. This lady would like to say, would you like to tell us who you are and what your comment is?
My name's Dolores Kelly. I'm the Deputy Leader of the SDLP.
Welcome, Dolores.
So Joe said about how John fell in love with Ireland. The Irish people fell in love with John. As a child, I mean, you might think this is just sort of an Irish yarn, but my granny had 3 pictures on her wall sitting behind her. You know the story, I'm sure. One was the Pope, the other one was Father Willie, who was her nephew, and the other one was John JFK. And can I just say, as someone who's a member of the Assembly, whose constituency still suffers from distant republicanism and violence, that my children are not having to grow up with the difficulties and experiences that I did, and I think that's down to the faith and the hard work of all of these good people in the front row. And I just want to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Okay, lovely words. Okay, thank you so much indeed for that.
And isn't it great to hear that accent? Love that Derry accent.
With a happy story as well, which is lovely. In fact, Ted Sorensen told me the story once about how when he had come from Germany, the president was driving along the streets, and there was lined by people, a lot of women, as you can imagine, all shouting up certain things to him. And the word that Ted Sorensen used was, the language was very earthy. And that by the time they got to O'Connell Street in Dublin, the Irish women were equally out, nurses and so on, and they were shouting up, "God bless you, Mr. President. May the Lord have mercy on your soul, Mr. President." A tale of 2 different cities. Joe, I think you'll appreciate that. Let's be, I suppose, a little reflective on the impact of President Kennedy's visit, Joe. Was it profound, or was it a passing thing of its time?
No, I don't think it was passing in this sense, that in his speech to the Dáil, which is a fascinating speech, as you well know, he actually talked about the achievements that had already occurred, as well as about what could occur in the future. And we went through extraordinary rapid change, even though we may not have noticed it all that much at the time, between 58 and 63, the previous 4 or 5 years. That is it's a satellite site, whatever the English for that is. It's a turning point in terms of our history, and it screams at you out of all the economic statistics, out of all these things, which are very boring, I know, but are absolutely crucial as to what's happening fundamentally. But we hadn't, I think, readjusted our image, our self-image, to come abreast of the changes, the fundamental changes that were occurring, and they were quite remarkable. They had to, because the 50s was such a crisis. And then the Kennedy image gave a lustre that we weren't deriving internally from ourselves. Sean Lemass was, I think, a very great Taoiseach, but he was not a dancing in the streets man.
No,
you would have known about that.
They didn't need hoarding to...
No.
Yeah.
So I think that Kennedy, in a way, he personified for us, he represented for us, he gave us the image of ourselves that we hadn't quite the confidence to begin groping towards, and said, listen, you can go in this direction too.
Yeah.
You can have the sense of, the easiest sense of self-confidence. Because what's beautiful about Kennedy is that here you have a very clinical intelligence. He was a highly intelligent man, very clinical intelligence, but a persona that, in a sense, softened the edges of the sharpness of that intelligence.
Yes, I understand.
We needed something along those lines to make us believe in ourselves to the extent that we deserved at that stage to believe in it.
And we're still waiting. In the meantime, no, I'm being cynical, because obviously I think he was, President Kennedy was more suited to Lemass than Dev. Dev being more isolationist, yes, Lemass looking out.
He had enormous admiration for De Valera. And I think, did I see it in something you wrote? Kennedy came to Ireland, if I remember correctly, and I am open to correction, in 1946 as a newspaperman.
As a journalist, that's right, with the Hearst newspaper.
In which he says, and this was very unusual for an American to say at that time, that had he been Irish, he would have supported Irish neutrality during the war.
Yes.
Now, at that time, the official American position was, they've let us down, they've ratted on us, we've done all this for them, and look, they turned their back on us, etc., etc. They refused our request for X, Y, Z, which wasn't actually true in lots of things. But for a young newspaperman to say that, knowing what public opinion in America was, including Irish America, I think it stamps that independence of mind that's characteristic of Kennedy the whole way through his life.
Yeah. He was here 3 times before this. He was here as a journalist, as you say, and he was here as a congressman briefly. He stayed in Lismore Castle with his in-laws, and then he was here as a senator, and he stayed across in the Shelbourne, which I presume some of you might be familiar with. Do we have a question from the floor? Again, name and what brings you here?
My name is Peter Castles, and I'm the director of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute at the National University of Ireland in Maynooth, which Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith helped us develop and establish about 18 months ago. And at the time when a number of us were coming together to establish the Institute, Jean kept reminding us that it wasn't just for Ted Kennedy's contribution to peace in Northern Ireland, but also his ability to bring business leaders, community leaders, people from politics from both sides of the aisle together to work for the better of society and for projects generally. So I just want to ask Lorraine, because you have that trait as well of being able to bring community leaders, business leaders, politicians together to work together for the betterment of society. Is that an Irish-American trait? Is it a Kennedy trait? Or is it something that has an Irish sort of element to it as well, of getting people from different backgrounds to work together for the benefit of all?
Okay, Loretta.
This is not for credit, Peter, right? That's a very intelligent question, and it's very broad, and I can only speak from my somewhat myopic personal experience. But I think there is a very ephemeral quality to the Irish. I have spent a long time now trying to identify it to no avail. But people like Irish people, I mean, that's a huge generalization. But if you get a group of, let me say, Irish Americans together, first of all, we always have fun. We have really good times together. And then when we focus on a project or an issue or a cause, that's laser beam energy has to have an effect. But I think the core of it is that we enjoy one another and we enjoy people. And there is usually, now I know I've been told since I was a child, the first thing in any organization is the split. But that hasn't happened in my experience. I've been very blessed. So I think that people of an ethnicity that share that, build on it, and if there's goodwill, which there generally is, you can accomplish an awful lot without making big speeches and just getting on with it, but always having fun.
Okay, well, we're good at that. I mean, I have to say, to our own credit, in the trumpet-blowing business. Let's take a question from the floor. This is from Congressman Patrick Kennedy. He's extremely welcome. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you. I figured with the name Patrick, after you made the reference, I had to stand up. As a former office holder who's still looking to be in the limelight, that's my Aunt Jean likes to say, I had to stand up.
You're welcome.
I thought maybe there could be a comment about how politics today is so disparaged in our country. It's very divisive and polarizing, and people don't want to go into politics. And yet, politics is a substitute for violence. And everyone in this room, particularly those who've been mentioned, have been such an important part of substituting politics for violence. And if there's ever a story, Ireland tells it about what's at stake if we don't work together. And I just want to thank you, Ryan, also for acknowledging, as Peter did, my father's work. Because my father also represented, unlike his brother, instead of the wonderful moment in time, my father represented a consistency of effort, as you said, Ryan. And I think what brought us here today was not only the great moment in time with his brother's visit, but the work that succeeded that by everyone in this room. By people like my Aunt Jean, who just kept the work going forward, even when it wasn't marked by great rallies and great romanticism. Because that's ultimately what's going to get us the job done, is people putting their effort in one day at a time to get this forward. And thanks so much for hosting us.
Great. It's great to hear from you, Patrick. Thank you. Okay. So, we're going to wrap up now because I want to introduce the Governor in just a moment, but I want to leave the last word to both Joe and Loretta, if you don't mind. Just final thoughts on the Kennedy story, the Irish-American experience. A couple of words just to finish this up nicely, if you want. Loretta.
I'm really eager to hear Governor O'Malley
Yeah.
because that's going to be the rest of the story.
Sure.
So I cede to Joe.
That's there for your few words. I love that. Okay, Joe.
I can't better that. I see the Governor.
Oh, I love you all. Okay. And I'm not going to go on about it. So, if Loretta and Joe would like to make your way to the seats, what a pleasure it is to introduce the Governor of Maryland, ladies and gentlemen. He's a 1916 aficionado, probably trying to convince his brothers to do the same. Of course, late of Mam Cross and Mam in that beautiful part of the world. He plays in a band. We hope to get him up later on to give us a few bars of something decent, perhaps. But he's always welcome home, back to Ireland. And Lord knows where this man's going, but I know it's not going down or sideways. It's the only other option. Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley.
Thanks very, very much. Thank you. Oh, my goodness. Ryan Tuberty, thank you very, very much. And thank you for that marvelous book. I've enjoyed every single page. And I'm sure it will find its way to the Christmas trees of many an Irish-American father in the years ahead. Adonai Oshla, I want to thank Secretary General Cooney. I want to thank all of the members who are here and the deputies and the senators and also the distinguished members of the press and Ambassador Rooney and Mrs. Rooney, Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith and Congressman Patrick Kennedy and Ambassador Collins from America and on to other things and all the members of the Kennedy family and the women and men who form the core of Ireland and the young people who hold its future. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the humbling honor of being able to speak with you today here in this place. Gorav Mila Malhukev. When John F. Kennedy came here 50 years ago, he shook this country's soul out. He drove around in an open-top car. He addressed the Irish people with an open heart. He even defied the rain. He asked his listeners to keep a sense of hope alive in the expectation, in the belief that it would triumph. Oppression covered half the world, and a hunger gnawed at so many places. Nuclear weapons had placed the very existence of human life on this planet in great jeopardy. The world's climate had begun to cough. And yet, there is always a yet. President Kennedy offered words of hope and optimism. He had recently offered the world a new strategy for peace, a peace that could save human life on this planet from the threat of nuclear annihilation. At American University in Washington, he said, "Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet, breathe the same air, and cherish our children's future." At the Berlin Wall, he spoke of peace with freedom. And here in Dublin, he talked of an Irish destiny, a vision of an Ireland that would be not merely a peaceful island in a sea of troubles, but a maker and a shaper of world peace. President Kennedy did not live to see the Berlin Wall fall, but he believed that it would. He would not see his country land a man on the moon, but he believed that it could. He did not see the internet and advances in technology that would bring our world even more closely together, but he believed that such things could be achieved. His brief visit to Ireland connected our countries vividly, connected us vitally, connected us spiritually. From New Ross to Hyannis, from the Oireachtas to the White House, John F. Kennedy planted a vision that would link us not only to the past, but to the deep, deep roots of the future. And the harvest of that faith remains here today, more vibrant now than ever. America, Ireland, the world we see from both sides of the Atlantic is a continuous circle of humanity, a circle broken only by the walls we build between and the darkness our compassion has yet to overcome. That infamous wall in Berlin has fallen. But still today, there are many walls of conflict, walls of fear, walls that blind us to the needs of others, walls that we foolishly imagine separate our fate from the fate of the other living systems of this planet, walls that must be overcome by Ireland and America together for the future of our shared humanity. For centuries, we've been word-linked, haven't we? We've been freedom-linked. We've been linked by our imaginations. We've been linked by our histories. We are linked by the sacrifices of those who have gone before us. There are no two countries more bound to each other. There are no two countries more grounded in the fact of their reaching out to the world. Our shared experience is that we share our experience of democracy, of generosity, of bravery, of hope. And perhaps nowhere in its recent history has Ireland been stronger than as a maker and shaper of peace. Peace. We in America look to it and are thankful for it. We know that we can always learn from it. In Colombia, they can take great inspiration from it. In the holy grounds of the Middle East, in all areas of conflict around the world. Here in Ireland, the peace process is one of our century's great breakthroughs, one to be admired, emulated, nurtured. While the United States played an important and helpful role, the drive for that peace came from the hard-working people of this island who saw the necessity of change. You brought peace to life. You raised it up from the ground. You cultivated it. What has been achieved through the patient work of so many is something that most thought was impossible. And yet you've dissolved the walls of old hatreds and made a greater room for your children's future. Peace, a process, Kennedy called it, an idea we must continue to wage. To be Irish, to be American, to be human, is to know that every challenge, however great, holds the seed of opportunity. And it has been suggested by some that a small country can do little in a world that seems increasingly dominated by the very large few. But the reality is that Ireland is often now the forerunner of truly democratic aspirations and realizations. This is the Irish example that President Kennedy celebrated and extolled during that visit here. That a nation and a people need not be large in size or powerful in force of arms in order to influence the conscience of the world. Look at what Ireland has done over the years. Pivotal in the disarmament debates at the United Nations. In the European Parliament and beyond, Ireland has stood up for the cause of civil rights, especially on behalf of women and minorities. Ireland has sent more help than other countries, both in terms of money and compassionate hands, to troubled areas of the world to alleviate great suffering. Ireland has contributed troops to peacekeeping missions across the globe: Central America, the former Yugoslavia, Cambodia, Liberia, the Middle East, East Timor, the UN headquarters on the East River. Senior Ireland Defense Force officers have commanded UN operations in Cyprus, along the Syrian-Israeli border, in Lebanon, in Liberia, along the border with India and Pakistan. Yes, Ireland has been noble. Ireland has been generous. And Ireland has been brave. Ireland's impact is not measured only in currency, but in its cultural influence, its moral reach, and in the open hearts of its immigrants, and yes, its immigrants. What can a small nation do? What difference can one person make? Perhaps all the difference. Education, economic opportunity, security, life science, the development of artistic and literary voices, the dignity of every individual, the common good we share, the greater good we seek. Yes, our circle is unbroken, and our relationship must constantly be renewed for the greater service of our one human family and this one planet we call home. 50 years since, and 50 years forward. The supreme reality of our time, President Kennedy said, is our indivisibility as children of God and our common vulnerability on this planet. The threat of global thermonuclear war hung like a cloud over Kennedy's generation. Today, our planet once again finds itself in a grave crisis, and it's also of our own making. We've been able to slow the doomsday clock, but climate change marches on unabated. This is not just about icebergs melting or polar bears drowning, is it? The carbon content of the Earth's atmosphere is higher now than it's been at any time in 3 million years. Our industrial era legacy of burning fossil fuels for energy is the cause, and as the dominant species of this small planet, we are driving the Earth into uncharted territory. And what are the effects? Sea level rise measured in meters, severe weather events with hurricanes and tornadoes dwarfing anything in human memory, exacting massive destruction of property and huge losses of human life. The vast majority of the world's scientists predict an accelerated loss of biodiversity, whole species of animals and plants, droughts across the whole swaths of our planet, and great hungers of famine death in continental proportions. No nation, big or small, rich or poor, or fast developing, can escape the urgent responsibility of this moment. As a global community, we must turn the deep underwater of our collective imaginations into stronger collaborations, better innovations, and better choices. We must move from economies of global depletion to localized economies of renewal and regeneration. That is to say, innovations that figure out better ways to feed and fuel and heal this world. Sustainable innovation economies whose jobs cannot be offshored. And a country like Ireland, make no mistake about it, can become a leader in moving a larger world to care and to act. Together with a growing consensus in the United States and the will of other nations, we can focus our progress in science and technology. And you know what? Every positive step is needed. Renewable energy, solar power, geothermal, wind, wave, carbon capture, green design, net zero energy homes, smart grids. What we stand for is what we stand on. And our young people understand this reality even more clearly than we do. And hanging in the balance of this great global collaboration is the very future of life on our planet. Is this easy? Of course not. It's life and death hard. But out of difficulty comes great promise. The promise of a more secure world, a more plentiful and prosperous world, a healthier and more just world, a better world for our children and grandchildren. Adversity is not our enemy. Adversity is the catalyst of all human progress. Arresting climate change is a new frontier in our search for peace with freedom. And we have to go beyond the bare acceptance of today's brooding clouds of self-defeating pessimism. True optimism is brave. True optimism digs deeper. True optimism understands, in the words of the Irish poet John O'Donoghue, that darkness is the great canvas against which beauty becomes visible. A final thought by way of story. Thanks in part to President Kennedy's vision and the talented nation of people who he brought together to make his belief in space exploration a reality. We are now among the first human beings to actually be able to view this Earth from outer space. Recently, a Canadian-born astronaut, Chris Hadfield, spent 5 months as commander of the International Space Station. And as he floated above Ireland, strumming his guitar, he sent down satellite pictures of this country steeped in beauty against the dark ocean all around. And the images he took the world's breath away. Even from a distance of space, one could see what a gorgeous country Ireland is. And while he was circling above us, Chris Hadfield also tweeted about his daughter, Kristen, who was studying psychology in, of all places, Trinity College, Dublin. All of our stories are connected. As the future rolls on, the present grows larger, and our past becomes more vital. John F. Kennedy believed there would always be a springtime, no matter how long it might take to return. His visit here made visible and solidified a growing confidence in this new country of an ancient people being an important actor on the international stage, an important catalyst in the ongoing heart work of humanity. Kennedy could intuit that we Irish and we Americans had an ocean between us, not to separate, but to allow. For all its depth and darkness, this is what the Atlantic does. It also joins us. We cannot afford to quarantine the better part of our desires on either side of the Atlantic. There's nothing wrong with the extravagance of aspiration when it is manifest in the right direction for mankind. There's nothing wrong with wanting things to be better when better is for everyone, not just ourselves, but the wider and further world, America and Ireland, the Irish diaspora, and the American dream of peace with freedom. They, together, have become a world power, a power potentially of the most far-reaching kind, a force for compassion and healing, for transforming our grief, our wounds, our loss, into a new tomorrow. For these things do not die. Our concern for the people of our one earth, our care for the well-being of the next generation, our love for one another. And in this powerful sense, and in the work we do for that new tomorrow, we will all be back in springtime.
Thank you. Lovely speech. Well, thank you, Governor, for such thoughtful words. And it's hard to hold a room full of people at the end of a long day, but you had us in the palm of your hands. So what you did with aplomb. So again, thank you so much. Governor Martin O'Malley, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And Katie, of course, welcome. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes proceedings this evening in Iveagh House at this end of the day, as it were. But we are going to go now and have a cup of tea or a glass of something a little stronger, depending on your peccadillos. So thanks for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and particularly to our friends from America. You know, we leave you with the last message, which is you are always, always, always welcome home. Good night, everyone.
My dad grew up there. He was born on the north side. And as far as